first thing that I'm actually going to do is ask you to talk to each other. Because this session isn't really about me as an expert on networks, despite how Mark has just presented me. This session is really about me providing you with tools and frameworks to facilitate a discussion between you as members of this global network, hopefully helping you make the discussions that you've already had become a little bit more productive, a little bit more focused, a little bit more strategic. The overall aim of this afternoon's session is strengthening the global network. That's what we really want to get a sense of. And what I'd really like you to be thinking of as you kind of go through the afternoon is, are we having conversations that are really going to contribute to that strengthening of the global network? And to start us off, what I want you to do is to turn to your neighbour, or the person nearest you, and to just exchange your views on what you thought was most interesting and most useful from this morning to take forward into this discussion on strengthening the global network. And you can have 5 or 10 minutes on this. Thank you.
Yes, but it's on the grassroots level, so it's not in the national level.
But just bear in mind the things that you've just talked about as being valuable going forward. As I walked around, some of the things that I heard were, there's a lot of talk about the power cube. There was a lot of talk about assumptions, about the kind of entity the network was, and therefore what we might need to do to strengthen it. There was a real sense that there was a lot of information in the morning session, some of which some of you are going to have to really go away and process to really make the most of. But I think there's also a sense that, yes, this is the idea of power itself is a valuable tool for the network to be using, to be reflecting on going forward. I'm going to do a short presentation on networks. And the first thing I want you to do is to guess who, you can't actually see it very well, is in there. And if you heard me say it earlier on, this is what's called a social network map. It was took 2 or 3 years to develop, which may be a clue. And it analyses the information flows around a particular kind of global network. Does it help if I say I stole this from the CIA? The person in the middle there is Osama bin Laden. And this is a social network map that was developed by US intelligence forces to try and understand how Al-Qaeda was moving and its network cells, etc. The reason why I presented this image to you is to really underline what the header of this slide. Networks are everywhere today. You can't open a newspaper without seeing the word network. They're ubiquitous, they're everywhere, and they're pervasive. There doesn't seem to be any area of life which isn't affected by networks, whether you're talking about Al-Qaeda or Facebook or anything in between. Everyone seems to want to get a bit of the network picture, or the network game, if you like. And why might this be the case? Well, there's increasingly a sense that the formal institutional arrangements that have brought us to the cusp of the 21st century lack scope, they lack speed, and they lack institutional capacity to keep up with the rapidly changing global agenda. And in order to really mobilise skills and resources of an increasingly diverse global population, we need to form networks that cut across national, institutional and disciplinary lines. And this wasn't me, this was Kofi Annan, so if you have a disagreement with it, you can take it up with him. Now, in disaster-related work, cross-organisational networks have played pivotal roles, and these are just a few of them. I know there are at least 2 or 3 which are represented by people here, ADRRN, which Manu Gupta is the chair of, and I know there are others as well, and there are many, I'm sure, here which aren't on this slide, like ECB and some of the national networks as well. They played really pivotal roles, and I haven't got the global network, I know Marcus is looking for it, in disaster-related work. And I think the question is, which we still seem to find ourselves asking, is, are networks any more than the latest buzzword? Is there something different about what networks are? Would anyone care to venture an answer to that? Or a show of hands, who thinks networks are more than the latest buzzword? Oof. Come on, you're at a global network meeting. Or are some people in the wrong room? Just too polite to say it. There's a growing body of research which shows that networks are a distinctive institutional form. They're an egalitarian, knowledge-based alternative to the individuality of markets and the power concentration of hierarchies. And hierarchies we heard a lot about from John earlier on today when he talked about state and state power. And markets we haven't heard so much about so far, and I think it would be interesting to explore what the role of markets are in disaster risk reduction. But networks are seen as an alternative, and all too often they're defined as not being one of these things. Networks are what you get in the spaces between markets and hierarchies. And this leads to all kinds of confusions. And this is why, and this quote from Demos, which is a British think tank, is still, I think, relevant. We are still some way from being able to structure public and organisational power in ways that really harness network potential. And I think it's still largely true today. Despite developments such as technologies, we're still a little bit baffled by what we mean by this whole entity. And part of the reason is that networks, as I said, are diverse. And they tend to deal with this diversity of opinion, of status, of power, of knowledge, by developing wish lists of what they should do. Because actually the conversation within a network that needs to happen is often a political conversation. It's often an uncomfortable one. And so you avoid it by basically saying, let's put down everything that everyone wants to do. And as a result, networks often look like this. They're, in a word, overloaded. I assure you, no donkeys were harmed in the making of this presentation. Moreover, when you're talking about political buy-in to networks, I think there's a lot of understanding of what hierarchies are. After all, most politicians rely on hierarchies in order to maintain and sustain their power. And there's a lot of understanding of what markets are, well, for perhaps some of the same reasons. But political buy-in to networks is rare and unreliable, and you tend to get two common reactions to networks at the policy level. Either a lack of understanding, or just a straight-off affront, sod off. How have we navigated some of these issues in looking at networks? Is to actually focus down on the practicalities. Most of the people that we've worked with, I've been working on networks and doing research on networks for almost 6 years now, almost as long as I've been working in the humanitarian sector. One of the challenges of doing research on networks is actually getting to talk to the people that do the doing of networks rather than the talking of networks. I love the quote from someone earlier on today. Networks should be about the field, not the table. And I love that. That's brilliant, and I think that's really a point that you should all be taking forward. But what is it that networks actually do? And as we went and we started talking to a number of different people who are actually doing the work of networks, we managed to distill out a really valuable set of ideas about network functions, what it is networks do in order to achieve their goals. And these were actually very concrete, practical things. So then we developed a paper, which Marcus talked about, and we found that this really resonated with quite a lot of different organisations. And the reason this resonated was understanding networks in terms of what they do helps us structure our discussions, and therefore it helps us start to harness that network potential we talked about earlier. It helps us say, what is our priority? It helps us say, what is actually a network? What should we be doing? And it gives us a common language for framing what might otherwise be very unguided, as I said, wish lists.